We've got the Dallas Cowboys heading to Tampa Bay as 2.5-point underdogs for this Monday night Showdown slate. This is Showdown coverage brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. Let's jump into the slate. So as I said, we had a 45.5-point over under. That's plenty for a shootout potential, but we did see Dallas have one of their worst performances of the season. Actually, maybe Dak's worst performance in maybe a couple of years to close out the season. So we're not feeling great about Dallas, not to mention the fact that they are overpriced relative to the Buccaneers. So as 2.5-point home favorites and getting a lot of value, and Tom Brady coming off of his best game of the season, I'm pretty comfortable stacking the Bucks in this game as opposed to their Dallas counterparts. So we'll start at the top. CD Lamb, I think he got a second team All Pro selection, which was a little bit of a surprise coming off of his late season resurgence, I suppose. A little quiet there in the middle of the season. So he is the highest priced player of the slate at 10,600. We have Dak Prescott at 10,400. We'll talk about those two together because they're pretty closely tied. I wouldn't play too much CD Lamb without Dak Prescott. CD Lamb at 10,600 is going to need to do a lot to find himself in the optimal lineup. If he does a lot, we're going to probably see Dak Prescott in the optimal lineup. So we do like both of those guys, but when you're putting $4 in your lineup, you're probably not going to have a ton of money left to stack like a skinny stack with Dak Prescott and CD Lamb. So it's not something we're going to do too terribly much. I think they're guys that it's kind of okay to not have too much exposure to. I wouldn't mind having some Dak Prescott with like one of the cheaper options for Dallas. If you're doing something like a 20 max, I wouldn't mind seeing like 35-40% Dak Prescott. I think that's perfectly viable, but it's just going to be really tough to get those two guys in together when we are going heavily onto the Tampa Bay side of the ball. So that's going to lead us to Tom Brady, 10,000, probably the highest projected play of the slate, third highest price play of the slate. And I don't feel too great coming off of that big performance about playing him, but you have to play one of these quarterbacks just because I feel like his roster percentage is going to be fairly high. I think this is going to be a pretty common construction. So throughout this video, we're going to discuss how we can stack Tom Brady with some of his receivers and keep a low cumulative ownership. And that's going to start with Mike Evans. Mike Evans is always significantly less rostered than Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's usually in a 60-65% range. Mike Evans is typically around 30%. I've even seen him less than 30% on slates this year. And this week, Chris Godwin is actually cheaper than Mike Evans by 400. Usually that gap's a little bit bigger, so we might see a little more ownership on Mike Evans. But yeah, throughout the year, Chris Godwin's been the more popular play, but he's always been significantly cheaper, even $1,000 cheaper at time. And it's nice to see the two get priced more closely together because yes, while Chris Godwin is more PPR friendly, Mike Evans is definitely more of a touchdown equity kind of guy. And he's got perhaps a higher ceiling in terms of yardage too. So we don't see big yardage outings for Chris Godwin. So I like Mike Evans a lot to stack with Tom Brady, especially when Mike Evans is at captain and Tom Brady's in the flex, because Mike Evans is the type of player that ends drives early with his long touchdowns. So Chris Godwin's more of a possession guy, but Chris Godwin fits more with Tom Brady at captain. So with all that being said, Chris Godwin's still somebody that I'm going to have a good bit of exposure to, someone I'm going to try to be over the field on. I'm going to play a lot of 4-2 lineups with Tampa Bay, so hopefully that allows me to get more Chris Godwin than people are willing to play. And I'm actually comfortable playing Godwin and Evans just because that tends to be a unique construction that not a lot of people are comfortable doing. Usually people are thinking one or the other, but I feel okay with Chris Godwin having that 10 target kind of medium projection that he could still get there even if Mike Evans has a big day. But that would have to be with Tom Brady at captain. I'm not really comfortable putting either of those receivers at captain with Tom Brady in the flex and one of the other ones between Evans and Godwin. So that's how I'm going to approach that trio. Now we've got Tony Pollard at running back at 8,000, Ezekiel Elliott at 7,800. Tony Pollard has been banged up a little bit, and Ezekiel Elliott has been putting in some work in the touchdown category. I don't know if he got one last weekend, but I know he was on a pretty respectable streak of touchdown scoring, and that'll probably continue in this game. But Tony Pollard, obviously, between the 20s is the more enticing option, but he's also going to be higher owned. We've seen Tony Pollard close to 40% in recent showdown slates, while Ezekiel Elliott has found himself at like 28% at times. And that's pretty good for the split between those two, because you definitely want some exposure to either of them. They have some of the best floors of the slate, and if you're not going to go in on Dak and CeeDee Lamb, then someone's going to have to succeed. So I would like sprinkling in some Ezekiel Elliott, some Tony Pollard, maybe 25% of each. Probably don't play them together unless you were stacking Dallas in this one, which is fine. We're only talking a 2.5 point spread, so you could stack Dallas. It's just that they're a little bit more expensive than their Tampa Bay counterparts, and you can get relatively similar projections out of them. For example, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, if they match CD Lamb, we're not too surprised. Leonard Fournette, if he matches both Elliott and Pollard or outscores both of them, we're not super surprised. If Rashad White outscores one of them, not super surprised, right? So if you're going to get a little bit of a roster percent discount and you're going to get be able to stack the home favorites, yeah, we'll go with Tampa Bay here. So that leads us to Dalton Schultz. Great one-off, great PPR option, someone who comes in pretty low owned usually. He usually comes in around 30-35% roster percentage, and he can be played without Dak Prescott. So if Dak Prescott has a bad day, you could still have a good Dalton Schultz game. He could still catch a touchdown. He's got great touchdown equity. He can also rack up a ton of catches. I mean, if Dak Prescott's having a bad day, you might see 10 catches out of Dalton Schultz. So he's an excellent play if you want to fade Dak Prescott. You want to play like Ezekiel Elliott and Dalton Schultz. Love that. They're both in the range where it's like you would probably see Tampa Bay players there, right? So if you put yourself in a position where you play Ezekiel Elliott and you play Dalton Schultz, you're forcing yourself to play some cheaper Tampa Bay players, and that's good business for getting your cumulative roster percentage down. So some of those cheaper guys we'll get into. Rashad White, 5,400. He's been splitting work with Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette has regained the starter role, and probably will throughout the playoffs, just because he's playoff Lenny. But we still are getting some good involvement out of Rashad White. And the good thing about Rashad White is he's another one of these backs that we've been talking about recently, that you see their teams utilizing them in every role. So they'll utilize him in any of the same roles that Leonard Fournette was utilized in. It just really depends when Leonard Fournette needs a break or they need to change a pace. So they're not afraid to use him in passing downs. They're not afraid to use him near the goal line. He's had a few touchdown receptions of the year, so he's an interesting stacking option. If you have to pick one of the running backs to go with Brady at captain, you might want to go White because he saves some salary, saves some roster percentage, and has maybe a little bit better opportunity to catch a touchdown. And that leads right into Russell Gage, someone who helps make these Bucks lineups work as well. So he's been serving as the number 3 option on a consistent basis, playing 60-70% of the snaps, something like that. Julio Jones is really getting in like 4 wide receiver sets, but Gage is the one that's kind of remaining on the field a lot of the time. So I really like sprinkling a lot of Gage in, and even some Julio Jones, just because you're going to have to make these lineups unique. You can't start every Bucks lineup with like Tom Brady, Leonard Fournette, Evans, Godwin, and 2 really cheap Cowboys. Like, that's not going to work. So you're going to have maybe a rule that has one of Gage or Julio in every lineup, or maybe one of Gage, Julio, or Otten in every lineup. Something like that is going to help you get unique. And then you've got T.Y. Hilton and Noah Brown. So this kind of is a lot of speculation that we have with these. So Noah Brown's been steady all year. 2,400 is way too low for his role, but DraftKings is accounting for T.Y. Hilton having an expanded role, and he's already had some highlights since he's joined the Dallas Cowboys, and they brought him in for the playoffs, right? So they didn't bring T.Y. Hilton in to finish out the regular season. He got his feet wet, but we don't know what his playoff snap share is going to be. Why would it be low when they felt the need to bring in another receiver? And he's a veteran presence that has already proven that he's still got some juice. So I don't understand why he would play a really low snap share, but the problem is DraftKings is already on top of it. So they've priced him at 3,000 and Noah Brown at 2,400. T.Y. Hilton would be essentially taking Noah Brown's role. So I understand why some people would be more inclined to play T.Y. I understand why he's a little more expensive, but it's still speculation. Noah Brown has been an excellent target for Dak Prescott all year. year, he has far outperformed his salary with them. So I don't think that he gets completely phased out. And in saying that, 2,400 is way too cheap for him. We saw that with the Jaguars. We saw Marvin Jones was way, way, way too cheap, and he ends up catching a touchdown and a bunch of passes. And Noah Brown's in that similar role where it's like, yes, we understand that he's the third or fourth option, fifth option sometimes if T.Y. Hilton takes over, but he has been a pivotal player for them, and he's done a lot of good things for them this season. So I like Noah Brown a lot at 2,400 because, one, he makes your rosters work. You can play him without Dak Prescott, and he might have a bigger role than people are giving him credit for going into the playoffs. So Ty plenty viable. I think his snaps do increase. I do believe he outsnaps Noah Brown, but I would not completely omit Noah Brown from your lineups. The last player we want to touch on is Cade Otton. Cade Otton without Cameron Brate has been steady, right? So towards the end of the year, he was fine. He's caught some touchdowns. He's had some major plays in this weird season for Tom Brady and the Bucks, but he has not really he didn't really pop off, right? And he didn't really maintain that role. But now he's only 1,800. He's pretty much a lock for 3 targets, which is what you can ask between 1,000 and 2,000. You're looking for give me 3 targets, give me 2, 3 targets, and just give me a couple catches, and we'll usually make value there. So he's a fine option to throw in there just to keep that cumulative ownership down, keep your Bucks lineups unique. So with that being said, let's go ahead and build a couple Bucks lineups here. So we're going to start with Tom Brady at captain. I'm going to try to be a little overweight with Tom Brady at captain because I really do like these Tampa Bay receivers. I like Mike Evans in the flex, and then we'll skip down just a bit. I do like the role where you include either Gage or Julio Jones in at least a good percentage of your lineup. So we've got Brady, Evans, Gage, throw Otton in there, and then we've got a good, healthy amount of salary left to figure out what we want to do with the Cowboys. That's some situation where we can go Pollard and Schultz. You still leave a ton of money on the table. You could upgrade Otton at that point by including maybe Julio. I don't think that there's too negative correlation between Gage and Julio. Like Julio is getting on the field in 4 wide receiver sets. It's not really taking Gage off the field, so it really doesn't hurt or help each other. I don't mind playing them together. So this lineup leaves a ton of salary. Tom Brady captain, Mike Evans, Russell Gage, Julio Jones, Tony Pollard, Dalton Schultz. You can take Pollard out and you could put Zeke in. You could play Pollard in something like Gallup. A lot of stuff you can do with this. And then the other thing I want to talk about is Micah Evans at captain. So if you go Evans at captain, you don't want to be too heavy on the rest of the passing attack. So you're going to go Evans and Brady, start there, throw Leonard Fournette in there. Maybe you throw in like a Julio Jones or a Russell Gage, probably Russell Gage. And now you have 6,600 left. You can probably go Ezekiel Elliott, 5,400. Throw in Gallup. So Mike Evans at captain, Tom Brady, Leonard Fournette, Russell Gage, Ezekiel Elliott, and Michael Gallup. And then you could go down from Zeke and, of course, go up from Gallup if you wanted to do that. But that's how I'm going to be approaching this slate. Thank you all so much for coming out. This has been Showdown coverage brought to you by sharpfootballanalysis.com. Good luck, and I'll catch you all next week.